If you want dinner, lick it off the floor. Those 7 words didn't just break the silence of the San Francisco gala, they shattered the last 30 years of my life. My son-in-law Tyler stood over me, his face twisted in a smug, high-tech grin, while my dinner plate lay shattered on the expensive marble. He had just physically shoved it off the table in front of Silicon Valley's entire elite, calling me technical debt that needed to be wiped. I didn't yell, I didn't beg, I just stood up, adjusted my coat, and looked him in the eyes with a terrifying, silent dignity. Tomorrow, I would do something even worse. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I leaned in close enough to smell the $700 scotch on Tyler's breath. He was riding a high of toxic ego and expensive liquor, emboldened by the belief that his status made him untouchable, and that the elite crowd around us would mistake his cruelty for the privilege of power. Close enough to see the sweat beginning to bead on his forehead, despite the air-conditioned chill of the penthouse. The room was deathly quiet. 100 people in designer suits were holding their breath, waiting for the old man to crack. "I know everything," I whispered. 3 words. That was all it took to watch the youngest CEO in the firm's history turn into a ghost. The smugness didn't just leave his face, it evaporated. His hand, still holding a wine glass that cost more than my first car, began to tremble. For a second, he looked like the amateur I always knew he was. I watched his eyes dart around the room, realizing that his carefully constructed fortress of glass and steel had a massive, gaping hole in the center, and I was the one standing right in front of it. I didn't wait for a rebuttal. I didn't need one. My retaliation would not be loud, and it would not happen in this room. Anger is for people who have nothing left to lose. I had logic. I had data. As I adjusted my cuffs and turned toward the exit, my shoes clicked rhythmically against the cold marble floor. Tyler didn't follow me. He couldn't. He was paralyzed by the sudden realization that the man he had treated like a museum exhibit was actually the architect of his own destruction. Walking out of that showroom penthouse, I felt the San Francisco fog hit my face, sharp and cleansing. For 3 years, since I buried my wife, I had been playing the role of the unwanted guest. I had walked through their home like a ghost, listening to Tyler's condescending jokes and watching my daughter, Olivia, dim her own light just to keep him from feeling small. Tyler saw me as a relic, an obsolete piece of industrial systems equipment that belonged in a junkyard. He thought he could bully me because my clothes weren't tailored and my phone was 3 generations old. He made a fatal error. He mistook my silence for submission. In my world, the world of high-capacity industrial safety, you do not wait for the explosion to tell you something is wrong. You look for the hairline fracture in the pressure valve. You listen for the slight hiss of a failing seal. For months, I had been the sentinel watching a massive flaw in the system of my own family. I walked to my car, a simple sedan that didn't belong in a lot full of Teslas and Porsches. Inside, I didn't reach for a tissue. I reached for my notebook. The retaliation hadn't just started, it had already been calculated. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was an audit, and Tyler's accounts were about to be closed. I drove away from that glowing glass tower and retreated to my sanctuary, my workshop. It is a place that smells of old solder, machine oil, and the cold, hard truth. Tyler would hate this room. There are no marble countertops here, no abstract art that costs more than a mid-sized sedan. There is only worn wood, stacks of blueprints, and the tools of a trade he considers obsolete. He thinks I am a relic of a dying industrial age. He doesn't realize that the laws of physics and systems do not change just because you put them in the cloud. Let's look at the balance sheet, because that is what this is. A few months ago, Tyler came to us with a performance that would have won an Oscar. He claimed his startup was on the verge of a systemic collapse. He sat in my workshop, the same chair I'm sitting in now, and he practically begged. He needed $75,000 to bridge the gap until his next funding round. That money wasn't just a number. It was Olivia's dream home fund. My daughter had spent 10 years working 60-hour weeks as a project manager to save that amount. She wanted a place with a garden, a place that felt like the warm home she grew up in before she met a man who preferred living in a showroom. I watched him take that check. I watched Olivia's handshake as she signed over her future to save his ego. People might ask why I didn't stop it then. Why did a man with my background let a predator into the vault? The answer is something I call the survivor's invisible chain. For years, I have been wearing a weight no one else can see. When you spend your life as the reliable one, the one who fixes everyone else's messes, you develop a psychological blind spot. My silence wasn't weakness. It was a cage I built for myself to keep the peace for my daughter. I thought if I absorbed Tyler's insults, if I played the role of the aging, invisible father-in-law, Olivia wouldn't have to feel the friction of his arrogance. I was a shock absorber for a system that was already failing, but while Tyler saw an old man staring blankly at the wall, I was performing a deep tissue audit of his life. I spent 40 years as an industrial systems expert. My job was to find the microscopic stress fracture in a $3 billion refinery before it turned the whole facility into a crater. I know how to look for the hiss of a failing seal. I saw the patterns. I saw the way he guarded his phone, like it contained the launch codes. I saw the business trips to Napa Valley that didn't align with any of his firm's public filings. The confirmation came 3 weeks ago. Olivia was in Chicago for a marathon presentation, and she asked me to meet a contractor at the penthouse. I arrived early. I was in the back library, surrounded by the silence of their expensive furniture when the front door opened. Tyler wasn't alone. He was with Mackenzie, an executive from a rival firm. They stepped into the adjacent study, leaving the doors ajar and speaking with the reckless confidence of people who believed the old man in the library was too obsolete to decode their corporate treason. I heard a liquidation. Tyler laughed that casual, dismissive laugh he usually saves for me and told her that Olivia was nothing more than technical debt. He bragged that the $75,000 he borrowed was actually the seed money for a new venture they were starting together. He was using my daughter's life savings to build a life that didn't include her. In that library, the invisible chain didn't just break, it evaporated. I realized I wasn't an unwanted guest in his house. I was the ghost in his machine. He thought he was deleting a legacy. He didn't realize he was giving the architect of the system the exact coordinates for the demolition. My phone vibrated against the worn wooden workbench, a series of sharp, persistent pulses. I didn't reach for it. I already knew the frequency of Tyler's desperation. For 8 months, he had operated under the assumption that I was a legacy system with a corrupted drive. Now that I had whispered those 3 words in his ear, his firewall was crumbling. I finally picked up the device. The screen was crowded with notifications from the family group chat. Tyler was putting on a clinic in gaslighting. He told the entire extended family that I had a senior moment at the gala. He claimed I was confused and agitated due to my age, and that he had knocked the plate over to distract from my embarrassing behavior. He even suggested a list of neurologists specializing in cognitive decline. It was a textbook move. When a narcissist is exposed, they do not retreat. They attempt to overwrite the observer's reality. I looked at the blue bubbles on the screen, words like obsolete, unstable, and concerning. I didn't feel the burn of humiliation this time. It was clinical. I was looking at Tyler through the lens of what I call the illusion of power in an empty wallet. Tyler is the personification of new money insecurity. He lives in a world of rented status and borrowed prestige. He needed to belittle me because I am a living reminder of what he lacks: actual intellectual substance and a foundation built on more than just venture capital hype. He sees me as technical debt because I know how to build things that actually last, while Tyler only knows how to pitch things that look good in a slide deck. His arrogance is a mask for a very specific type of terror, the fear that if the world stops looking at his performance, they will realize the stage is empty. While he was busy typing his insults, I was looking at a different screen. I had spent the last few hours running a preliminary audit on the accounts he thought were hidden. The data didn't lie. While my daughter Olivia was working 18-hour days to cover the operational losses of his startup, Tyler was financing a parallel reality. I found a monthly recurring charge for $35,000. It wasn't for a server farm or a research lab. It was for a luxury penthouse rental in Pacific Heights, a private sanctuary for his corporate retreats with Mackenzie. I looked at the transaction date. It was the same day I handed him that $75,000 check from Olivia's home fund. He hadn't used that money to save a business. He had used it to upgrade the infrastructure of his betrayal. He had blinded Olivia with a web of falsified digital dashboards, masking the drain on their accounts as strategic reinvestments or urgent R&D capital calls, financial smokescreens that a loyal wife and partner would have no reason to doubt until now. I watched Olivia's mechanical response in the group chat. Let's just move past this. Dad is just tired. The words were hollow, the digital equivalent of her dimming light. She was still trapped in the narcissistic fog, performing the duties of a supportive wife to a man who was actively liquidating her future. I set the phone down and looked at the blueprint of Tyler's empire. It was a house of cards built on a stolen foundation. He thought he could delete me from the system. He forgot that the architect always leaves a back door. I stood up and put on my coat. The period of passive observation was over. It was time to transition from data gathering to a full forensic hunt. I had enough to know he was a liar. Now, I needed the evidence that would make him a criminal. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need a tearful admission of guilt. I needed an audit. In my world, emotion is a secondary variable that usually clouds the data. I needed the logic of the paper trail, the kind of absolute certainty that only a balance sheet can provide. That afternoon, I drove to a quiet diner on the outskirts of the city to meet Frank. Frank is a retired forensic auditor and a man who speaks the language of numbers with the same surgical precision I use for industrial schematics. He was my peer in the old guard, the kind of man who understands that every cent leaves a fingerprint if you know how to look for it. The diner smelled of stale coffee and industrial-grade floor cleaner, a neutral ground for the work we had to do. I slid the manila folder across the table. It contained everything I had gathered. The group chat screenshots, the bank statements from Olivia's drained accounts, and the details of that $35,000 recurring charge for the penthouse. Frank didn't say a word for the first 10 minutes. He just put on his glasses and began to pull at the digital threads of Tyler's so-called success. He moved through the documents like a logic board processing a command, his eyes never losing their cold, analytical focus. Here it is, Frank whispered, pointing to a series of wire transfers. We tracked the $75,000 I had given Tyler the money meant for Olivia's dream home. It had not gone into his startup's payroll or research and development. Within 48 hours of hitting his account, the funds were rerouted through a shell company to something called Coastal Consulting Solutions. It was a side LLC Tyler had incorporated 3 months ago, and he wasn't the only name on the paperwork. Mackenzie, the executive from the rival firm, was listed as an equal partner. My daughter had unknowingly provided the startup capital for her husband's exit strategy and his mistress's lifestyle. But as Frank dug deeper into the business filings of Coastal Consulting Solutions, the hunt took a sharper turn. He found the pitch decks Tyler had been using to secure new venture capital. My stomach turned, not with sadness, but with the cold realization of the intellectual theft. Tyler was marketing a proprietary AI safety protocol that he claimed would revolutionize industrial manufacturing. As I scanned the technical specs, I recognized the logic immediately. It was not AI. It was a digital rebrand of my own unpatented industrial safety designs, the very ones I had shared with him over late night dinners when I thought I was mentoring a son. In his arrogance, he forgot that while the designs were unpatented, they were my legally documented trade secrets, time-stamped and stored on my private servers years before he even understood the physics of a failsafe. He was using my life's work to fund his betrayal. My compassion had been a luxury he had overdrafted for years, and now I saw that the theft was complete. He had taken my money, my daughter's future, and my intellectual legacy, all while calling me obsolete. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. I looked at Frank, who was already documenting the discrepancies with lethal precision. The hunt was over. We had the path of the money and the source of the stolen assets. Tyler thought he had deleted me from the system, but all he had done was give me the exact coordinates for the shutdown. We had the evidence, now I just needed to find the kill shot. Frank didn't look up from the screen. He didn't have to. The silence in that booth was heavier than any indictment. I watched his finger hover over a digital file titled Intellectual Property Transfer Protocol, August 14th. This was the date Tyler had closed his massive Series B funding round, the day he became the golden boy of the valley. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the technical jargon. It was a legal agreement stating that I, Gary, had willingly transferred all rights to my industrial safety systems to Tyler's startup for the sum of $0. It was a total liquidation of my life's work. But there was a problem with the ledger. I had never seen this document. I had never been asked to sign it. Then the memory surfaced. 2 months ago, Tyler had handed me a thick stack of routine insurance updates for the family trust, rushing me to sign so he could catch a flight. He had buried this transfer deed on page 42 of a 50-page packet. To finalize the theft, Mackenzie's firm had used a corrupt notary to stamp the document, creating a paper trail that looked bulletproof to his investors. "Look at the bottom, Gary," Frank said, his voice as dry as a desert floor. I zoomed in on the signature line. There it was. My name, Gary Walsh. At first glance, it looked like my hand, the steady, practiced script of a man who spent 40 years signing off on high-pressure safety inspections. But I didn't feel a pulse of panic. I felt a cold calibration of reality. I looked for the flaw in the execution. In industrial systems, a forgery is just a bad weld. If you look close enough, you can see where the metal didn't fuse. I saw it in the shaky loop of the letter G. I saw it in the unnatural hesitation at the end of the H. Tyler had spent weeks watching me sign birthday cards and checks for $75,000, trying to memorize the rhythm of my hand. He thought he was a master of detail. He didn't realize that a signature isn't just a shape, it is a mechanical reflex developed over 68 years. He forged it, I said. The words didn't tremble, they were clinical, calm, factual, lethal. He didn't just forge it, Frank added, pulling up a secondary file. He used this forged document as collateral to secure $9 million in venture capital. Gary, this isn't a family dispute anymore. This is federal wire fraud and identity theft. This is a felony with a mandatory minimum sentence. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon the ghost of a feeling, but there was only clarity. I had been the silent investor in Tyler's version of a family, but now I realized it had been a subscription where I was footing the bill for my own erasure. He had treated my very identity like technical debt, something to be overwritten and discarded once the system was profitable. This forged signature was the death certificate of our relationship. It was the final piece of data that removed any remaining path to redemption. Tyler wasn't just an arrogant man-child or a cheating husband. He was a predator who had built a $9 million empire on a stolen foundation. I closed the laptop. The glow of the screen faded, replaced by the dim light of the diner. I didn't need any more spreadsheets. I had the smoking gun, and it was signed in my own name with a shaky, lying hand. Tyler thought he could delete me from the machine. He forgot that the architect doesn't just build the walls. He knows exactly where the self-destruct sequence is located. The debt was no longer civil. It was criminal. And tomorrow morning, during the Series C funding meeting, I was going to call in the balance. The boardroom of Tyler's headquarters was a cathedral of glass and ego. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city of San Francisco looked small, just like the people Tyler thought he had surpassed. He stood at the head of a mahogany table, gesturing toward a glowing screen. He was mid-pitch, charming a group of venture capitalists for a Series C round that would have netted him another $20 million. He looked powerful. He looked untouchable. Then I walked in. I wasn't alone. Frank was on my left, carrying the black leather portfolio that contained Tyler's professional death warrant. To my right was a senior litigator who specialized in white-collar crime. The room went cold. Tyler's performance smile didn't just waver, it died. "Gary, what are you doing here?" Tyler's voice lacked the polished resonance of his toast at the gala. "We're in the middle of a private valuation." "I know," I said, "and I'm here to correct the numbers." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply signaled to Frank, who began sliding copies of the forensic audit across the table. I watched the venture capitalists, men and women who measure life and risk, and return, pick up the documents. They weren't just seeing this for the first time. My legal team had already spent the morning flooding their compliance departments with the forensic data. My arrival was simply the final public nail in the coffin of Tyler's credibility. I watched their eyes scan the proof of the forged signatures on the safety patents. I watched them see the wire transfers of my daughter's $75,000 into a mistress's shell company. The fast and break things CEO was suddenly a man staring at a cliff. Tyler's hands hit the table. He started to stammer about technical errors and family misunderstandings, but the air had already left the room. The lead investor stood up, adjusted her glasses, and looked at Tyler with a level of disgust that even I hadn't managed to summon. She didn't say a word. She just walked out. The others followed like a synchronized system shutdown. Tyler collapsed into his designer chair. The silence was absolute. "You destroyed it," he whispered, looking at the empty seats. "My legacy, my empire, it's all gone." "It was never yours, Tyler," I replied, leaning over him just as I had at the gala. "It was stolen property. I am the architect of this system. I know exactly how to turn it off." Justice didn't stop in the boardroom. The fallout was a total liquidation of Tyler's rented life. The Pacific Heights penthouse went back to the market. Coastal Consulting Solutions was dissolved under the weight of a federal investigation. But the real victory wasn't the destruction of a predator. It was the reclamation of a life. Olivia didn't just leave him. She woke up. The mechanical daughter I had seen at that dinner party disappeared. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but rather a slow, painful shedding of the lies he had fed her for years. As the fog of his gaslighting cleared, she began to reclaim the pieces of herself she had sacrificed to keep him comfortable. In her place was the woman I had raised, smart, resilient, and finally seeing the world in full color again. I didn't keep the restitution money. My life is simple, and my needs are met. Instead, I established the Gary Walsh Legacy Foundation. We provide patent defense and legal funding for elderly inventors and industrial experts whose life work has been targeted by the same tech bro culture that tried to erase me. We are turning that stolen $75,000 into a shield for others. Sitting on my porch now, far from the cold marble of the city, I have come to realize that some people spend their whole lives trying to build a monument to themselves out of glass. They forget that glass is fragile. They forget that a house without a foundation is just a waiting room for a collapse. If you find yourself in a similar situation, being told you are technical debt or obsolete by someone who hasn't even learned the basics of character, remember this. Your value is not something they can delete. Arrogance is just a mask for the fear of being seen for what they really are, empty. Forgiveness isn't always about making peace with the person who hurt you. Sometimes it is the quiet satisfaction of setting a boundary so strong they can never cross it again. True legacy isn't written in a funding round. It is written in the lives you protect and the seeds of justice you choose to sow when the world tells you to stay silent. If this story reminded you of your own worth, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Don't forget to follow for more stories of justice.